Breaking news this hour, U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Truth Social just moments ago that he is pausing the 50% tariffs against Canada. He's giving a 3-day grace period while both sides negotiate a deal. For more reaction and details, we're going to go live to CP24's Andrew Brennan. Andrew?
Let's talk about down to the wire, almost at midnight with barely 90 minutes to spare. The President of the United States announcing on his social media platform, Truth Social, that there seems to be a deal not just in the works, but nearly finalized. And therefore, there will be that 3-day reprieve on these 50% tariffs that had been promised by the American president on roughly $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. So let's go through what Donald Trump is saying right now, because there's a lot of pieces to this here. He says he's paused these 50% tariffs against Canada.
On Monday, President Trump announced that the United States will impose 50% tariffs on certain Canadian goods. And here's what U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said about the motivation for that action.
In April of 2025, as you know, the president embarked on a new trade policy really designed at reshoring manufacturing production to the United States and getting the trade deficit down after exploding for decades. We imposed tariffs on all the world at varying levels. Of all the countries who retaliated against the United States, one was the People's Republic of China and the other was Canada.
So it was Canada, under the newly minted Prime Minister Mark Carney, which was the only country outside of communist China that retaliated against the United States. And Greer just called them out on it publicly. Greer's comments point to something taking shape quietly on our northern border, something that's about to make the phrase special relationship obsolete. Here's the story you're being handed. Trump slapped tariffs on Canadian goods, Mark Carney rose up as the defender of Canadian sovereignty, and the big bad United States is bullying its little neighbor. But that's not the fight. If you look at Canada as a country, you're missing the point. Mark Carney's function isn't to defend Canada. It's to rescue the globalist system from the resurgent American Republic. And this week, we saw big developments on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm Susan Kokinda. I've tracked how the British have used this special relationship with the United States to maintain their global power since the beginning of the last century. And what I'm going to show you today is that that arrangement is quietly being replaced by something else. You're going to want to follow this, so hit that subscribe button and like and share so we can reach more people. I'm going to cover 3 things today. First, the command structure Carney has assembled and who's staffing it. Second, why the model the empire has run for 100 years is finished and how their own people are admitting it. And third, the reversal that almost no one has noticed, the one that points to a new operating system and a new address. So let's start with Mark Carney's reaction to the 50% tariff announcement. Carney declared Trump's actions as threats to Canadian sovereignty, and he declared that Canadians would stand together in the face of it.
Canada and the United States are once again at a critical point in their trade relationship. President Donald Trump has ordered a new 50% tariff on certain Canadian goods, set to take effect on August 19th. Canadian Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is in Washington, with both sides working to reach a deal before the deadline. But the two countries are still far apart on several key issues, including tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, automobiles, and softwood lumber. Canada is pushing for tariff relief, while the U.S. is demanding concessions from Canada. Now, with only 3 days left, the big question is, will Canada and the U.S. reach a deal, or will these new tariffs take effect? And what do you think Canada should do? Negotiate, compromise, or stand its ground? Please share your thoughts in the comments.
The Trump administration has announced a new 50% tariff on about $20 billion worth of goods that the U.S. imports from Canada. And this 50% tariff would go on top of any other tariffs that those goods are already facing. These are set to take effect just a month after they were announced, so that'll be August 19th.
In some respects, President Trump seems very obsessed with Canada, even though they're a relatively small problem.
A few things are happening here. One is trying to gain some leverage over Canada, but more broadly, they're also trying to send a message to any number of U.S. trading partners. Anybody that retaliates against the U.S. could face this sort of tariff if they do something that the Trump administration doesn't like. The USMCA was President Trump's signature achievement in his first term on the trade front, but just 6 years later, when it was up for renewal this summer, he decided he didn't want to extend it. That leaves the USMCA in a little bit of limbo. The US has been negotiating with Mexico. We've seen US officials in Mexico City, but Canada is not at the table in the same way. And that does appear to be one reason why we're now seeing this next round of tariffs.
From everything that we continue to hear, the two sides are still far apart. And at the core of it seems to be concerns of being expressed by Canadian negotiators, according to our sources, that the United States is not addressing those sectoral tariffs that have hit steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber. And, you know, we've heard it time and again from the Prime Minister. What he wants to have here is a comprehensive deal, not just a deal that addresses the irritants that Donald Trump is talking about, getting more access to our dairy market, for example, and American booze back on Canadian shelves. The Prime Minister wants, you know, kind of a quid pro quo here, but it looks like we're still far away. The very fact that we're talking still as this deadline approaches, you say tomorrow, but, you know, to put that into context, in terms of Eastern time, what we're looking at is about 15 hours, because these tariffs could come in as early as 12:01 a.m. And at this point, we know that the talks have gone up to the most senior level. The very fact that the Prime Minister spoke with the U.S. President yesterday afternoon, though Mark Carney not sharing a lot of details around that, because as we heard him say in Newfoundland, he said this in French when they were making the announcement on Churchill Falls in Newfoundland, Labrador. He talked about how these are intense negotiations, sensitive negotiations, and he did not want to negotiate it in public. Regardless, though, you know, Canadians are watching this very closely. As you say, it could have a huge impact on our national economy. $28 billion worth of Canadian exports would be affected by these tariffs if they go in at 12:01.
Trade talks are heading down to the wire before new U.S. tariffs take effect next week.
It's demonstrably different than at any time over the last year and a half, and that the Americans are also speaking in real terms. They know the consequence of their trade actions.
CTV News has learned lead negotiator Janice Charette has warned U.S. officials about possible pushback if the Trump administration moves ahead with its 50% tariffs on hundreds of Canadian products. Charette said Ottawa has no control over how provinces or the public may respond. An industry source also told CTV News Ottawa cannot push the provinces to put U.S. alcohol back on the shelves unless there is significant tariff relief. Canada's top trade officials met with the top negotiator for the U.S. on Tuesday. No word yet if they will meet again this week.
Breaking news. Taco. Trump always chickens out. Donald Trump has delayed the 50% tariffs that were supposed to go into effect at midnight against about $20 billion worth of Canadian goods. He posted 25 minutes ago on his Truth Social saying that Canada and the United States have reached a deal and that basically the paperwork just needs to be signed. He also talked about reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. We will have to see if that comes to fruition or not. Anyways, we will have to see what happens over the next 3 days. But tonight, Trump has talked.
And Mike, we know that the Prime Minister and the President spoke this afternoon for the second time in 2 days, and nothing is final until it's final. But many businesses on both sides of the border presumably breathing a huge sigh of relief tonight.
Yeah, maybe a semi-sigh of relief, Omar, and I say that because of a statement I'll read you in just a few moments from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Let's start, though, from what we do know from the American side. In addition to that Truth Social that you just read out from U.S. President Donald Trump, we also are seeing a statement from United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, who posted on X just a few moments ago, the deal will include comprehensive market access for all American goods, economic security commitments, digital trade alignment, and many important provisions that will continue to protect our market and American workers along with our Canadian partners. Unclear exactly what the details are in all of that, Omar, but one has to think back just a month ago when they were going to impose these tariffs on Canada, and they signaled the problem with three things: the Canadian counter tariffs on U.S. autos, so one has to think that those might be going away, market access as well to Canada's dairy sector, so that must be included in this, and of course the alcohol ban, the American alcohol ban on U.S. store shelves. You'd have to think that that is included in this as well. We know that the American side had said in the past, told CTV News, they wanted that gone and they wanted the alcohol back on store shelves the day after a deal is signed. So does that mean tomorrow, or does that mean possibly Friday or Saturday now that we have this 3-day extension? Now to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. They put out a statement today, immediately after this news, saying that this is good news, however, saying that an extension doesn't bring the certainty that a signed interim deal would have. We know that stability in the short term is in short supply, I should say, and businesses will take any ounce they can get. However, it says this limbo state is not anyone's preferred outcome, and time is of the essence. And it sure is, Omar, because there are 3 more days until this reprieve ends on Friday, it seems.
The Trump administration is facing a new lawsuit attempting to stop part of its tariff agenda. A coalition of 25 states is suing over the forced labor tariffs, arguing the Supreme Court already ruled the president does not have the power to impose tariffs in this way, and that the justification in this case is a false pretext.
Here's what gets lost when this fight is framed as America versus Canada. Some of the loudest pushback on these tariffs isn't coming from Ottawa. It's coming from inside the United States. 25 states are now suing the president, arguing his tariffs are illegal, and it's not the first time the courts have been pulled in. So the honest question is this: when America's own states say these tariffs break the law, does that strengthen Canada's hand before August 19th?
Trump got rejected by Canada this week, but do not let Mark Carney take credit for what Canadians built without him. Washington sent a new tariff offer. Canada sent it back. Not good enough. That part is genuinely strong, but here's the part nobody is saying out loud. 62% of Canadians want to hit back hard if August 19th tariffs land. Only 7% want to surrender. Mark Carney did not create that resolve. Canadians created it despite their government. While Carney was in Italy, while Carney was quietly offering back dairy and liquor concessions, while Carney was handing Trump a revenue check on the Gordie Howe Bridge and standing silent while Trump called it an American victory, Canadians built the pressure. Canadians boycotted American products into $357 million in losses. Canadians unified. Canadians demanded counter tariffs. Canadians carried this fight on their backs for 18 months, and Trump's own unions are now begging him to stop because attacking Canada is destroying American factory floors. American workers broke Trump's strategy, not Mark Carney's diplomacy. Canada is winning this despite its leadership, not because of it. 40 million Canadians negotiating as one voice is unstoppable. But imagine what we could do with a leader who actually fought back instead of flying to Italy during a national crisis. Trump cannot break Canada, but can Mark Carney?
Day, Leanne, we had a blockbuster positive number. The U.S. economy actually lost jobs in July. They put out 2 different numbers on the same day based on whatever survey it is. So it's either 23,000 job losses based on a payroll survey or 87,000 job losses based on the broader survey, which is equivalent to how Statistics Canada reported it today. Either way, bad news in the U.S. And I think not just the month's numbers, but the longer-term trend in the U.S. labor market has been quite different than Canada. Since Donald Trump came back in with his trade war and the tariffs and everything else, overall employment in the U.S. has actually been falling, whereas it's been growing in Canada. Real wages in the U.S. are falling. Real wages are growing in Canada. So the assumption that the trade war would kind of put Canada on its knees economically is not panning out.
Canada is getting a major economic boost, while the U.S. is showing signs that something is going wrong. Jobs are growing north of the border, but America is moving the other way. That growing gap could become a serious problem, especially if the weakness in the U.S. job market is deeper than officials are saying, and that could be very bad for the U.S. Canada added 75,100 jobs, nearly 5 times what economists expected. In the very same month, the United States unexpectedly lost 23,000 jobs. 2 neighboring economies, tied together at the hip, moving in opposite directions. Start with the Canadian side, because the contrast is what makes the American weakness so visible. Canada added 75,100 jobs in July, dramatically exceeding the roughly 16,500 that economists had forecast. The unemployment rate fell to 6.4%, a 2-year low. That was not a marginal beat, it was a blowout, more than 4 times the expected gain, in an economy that many analysts had warned was sliding toward recession only months earlier. For a country absorbing American tariffs across steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber, adding 75,000 jobs in a single month is a remarkable demonstration of resilience. Now, the American side. The United States unexpectedly lost 23,000 jobs in July, a decline where growth was expected. A net loss of jobs in the world's largest economy is a significant event on its own. But the July loss is only the surface of a deeper problem. When two integrated economies diverge this sharply in the same month, with Canada surging and the United States contracting, it raises a serious question about whether the American labor market is beginning to lose momentum in a way the headline figures obscure. The US unemployment rate stood at 4.1%, and on its face, that looks healthy. But that number does not tell the whole story. The labor force participation rate fell, meaning fewer Americans were actively looking for work. This is the detail that changes everything. When people stop searching for jobs, they are no longer counted as unemployed, which means the unemployment rate can hold steady or even improve while the actual job market weakens. A 4.1% rate built on falling participation is far less reassuring than a 4.1% rate with people actively entering the workforce. The headline masks the underlying deterioration. Then comes the most alarming signal of all the revisions. Earlier US job numbers were revised sharply lower. Job growth for May and June was cut by a combined 103,000 positions. That means the American labor market was substantially weaker in the spring than officials and investors first believed. Revisions of that magnitude are a warning in themselves because they indicate the initial data painted too optimistic a picture. The economy people thought they were seeing in May and June did not actually exist at the strength reported. Combined with July's outright job loss, the revisions suggest the slowdown could be deeper and longer running than anyone realized. Put the pieces together, and the American trajectory becomes clear. A job loss in July, a participation rate falling, propping up the unemployment number artificially, and 103,000 jobs erased from the prior 2 months through revisions. Each of these signals alone would warrant attention. Together, they describe a labor market that may have been quietly weakening for months while the headline unemployment rate concealed the trend. That combination is why analysts are raising fresh concerns about the health of the broader US economy. The Canadian strength makes the American weakness impossible to ignore. Canada is adding jobs at a pace far above expectations while the United States sheds them. Canada's participation held up while America's fell. Canada's unemployment hit a 2-year low through genuine job creation, while America's steady rate rests on people leaving the workforce. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty.
The Trump administration has announced a new 50% tariff on about $20 billion worth of goods that the U.S. imports from Canada. And this 50% tariff would go on top of any other tariffs that those goods are already facing. These are set to take effect just a month after they were announced, so that'll be August 19th.
In some respects, President Trump seems very obsessed with Canada, even though they're a relatively small problem.
A few things are happening here. One is trying to gain some leverage over Canada, but more broadly, they're also trying to send a message to any number of U.S. trading partners. Anybody that retaliates against the U.S. could face this sort of tariff if they do something that the Trump administration doesn't like. The USMCA was President Trump's signature achievement in his first term on the trade front, but just 6 years later, when it was up for renewal this summer, he decided he didn't want to extend it. That leaves the USMCA in a little bit of limbo. The US has been negotiating with Mexico. We've seen US officials in Mexico City, but Canada is not at the table in the same way. And that does appear to be one reason why we're now seeing this next round of tariffs